Elijah Cain never thought digging a grave would bring 6 armed women to his door. But on that cold autumn morning, as the last clods of earth fell over the stranger's coffin, he saw them, riding in like a black storm against the golden prairie. Wide-brimmed hats pulled low, rifles strapped to their saddles, eyes sharp as hawks. He had no idea who they were. He only knew one thing: nothing on his ranch would ever be the same again. 2 days earlier, Elijah Cain had been riding the North Trail, checking the far fences of his land, when he spotted a dark shape sprawled in the dust ahead. At first, he thought it might be a coyote. But as his horse drew closer, the shape became a man, barely clinging to life. The stranger's lips were split and dry, his skin burned raw by the relentless sun. His boots were caked with mud that spoke of long, desperate travel. Beside him, a bay horse stood trembling, its sides heaving, ribs sharp beneath the hide. Elijah dismounted quickly and knelt beside the man. "Easy now," he said, pouring a trickle of water from his canteen between the stranger's cracked lips. The man swallowed weakly, then gripped Elijah's arm with surprising strength. His hand was hot, fevered. From the inside of his tattered coat, he pulled a crumpled envelope, the paper stiff with dried blood. He pressed it into Elijah's palm like it was the most important thing in the world. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Elijah glanced down at the envelope. Most of the writing was smudged or blotted out, but one word, written in a woman's careful hand, stood clear in the corner. Rachel. When Elijah looked up again, the man's eyes were already closing. One long, rattling breath escaped his chest, and that was it. The stranger's hand went limp. For a moment, Elijah just sat there in the stillness, the weight of the letter heavy in his grip. Whoever Rachel was, she had just lost someone. And Elijah had no idea how to find her. He searched the saddlebags for clues, a few cartridges, some jerky, a knife with a broken tip, but nothing that told him who the man had been. The right thing to do was clear. Elijah loaded the body onto his horse and rode toward the high hill that overlooked the golden sweep of the plains. There, he dug a grave with his own hands. It was hard, slow work, the kind that made a man think too much. When the last clods of dirt fell over the stranger, Elijah stood in the wind, holding his hat to his chest. He figured it was the end of a sad trail for the man. But as Elijah turned his horse back toward the ranch, he had no way of knowing that grave had just opened the door to the biggest trouble of his life. The 6 women rode in like a storm, their horses coated in dust, eyes scanning the land as if expecting trouble to leap out of the mesquite at any second. They dismounted without a word, boots thudding against the dry earth. The tallest among them, a broad-shouldered woman with dark hair braided tight, stepped forward. Her face was striking, not because it was pretty, but because it was carved from the kind of resolve that only comes from surviving too much. "You buried my husband," she said, her voice flat but heavy, like a hammer on iron. Elijah's brow furrowed. "Ma'am?" "My name's Rachel," she continued, eyes never leaving his. "You found him out there. You gave him a grave." She let the words hang for a moment. "Now, we're staying here." The 6 women rode in like a storm, their horses coated in dust, eyes scanning the land as if expecting trouble to leap out of the mesquite at any second. They dismounted without a word, boots thudding against the dry earth. The tallest among them, a broad-shouldered woman with dark hair braided tight, stepped forward. Her face was striking, not because it was pretty, but because it was carved from the kind of resolve that only comes from surviving too much. "You buried my husband," she said, her voice flat but heavy, like a hammer on iron. Elijah's brow furrowed. "Ma'am?" "My name's Rachel," she continued, eyes never leaving his. "You found him out there. You gave him a grave." She let the words hang for a moment. "Now, we're staying here." Elijah glanced at the other women, all of them armed, their holsters worn from use. They looked back at him without flinching. He shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I've got no room for." "We're not asking," another woman cut in, her hand resting casually on the butt of her revolver. The sun caught the metal, and Elijah understood this wasn't bluster. These women meant every word. By nightfall, they had moved in like they'd always belonged. The bunkhouse was claimed, bedrolls spread out, boots lined neatly by the wall. The kitchen, too, was theirs. Elijah came in to find a pot of stew bubbling and two of them slicing bread with military precision. Out in the yard, one woman was mending a section of broken fence while another was brushing down the horses. They moved with purpose, no wasted motion, their eyes always scanning the horizon. And even when their hands were busy, their rifles were never far. Elijah watched from the porch, chewing slowly on the stew they'd set in front of him. These weren't helpless widows looking for charity. They were survivors, hardened by something he didn't yet understand. And beneath their work, beneath the polite nods and quiet words, Elijah could feel it, a tension, coiled tight, like a rattlesnake hidden in tall grass. Whatever had driven these women here, it wasn't just grief. It was danger. And Elijah had the uneasy feeling that, by letting them stay, he just stepped into the middle of it. It didn't take long for the reason behind the women's arrival to show itself. The afternoon sun burned low and hot, turning the prairie gold. Elijah was tightening a corral post when he caught sight of it, a smear of dust on the eastern horizon. He squinted, the wind carrying a faint tremor of hooves. Riders. And they were coming fast. He leaned on the fence rail, watching the dust cloud grow until the shapes of men on horseback emerged. At their head was a man Elijah knew too well, Jed Blackwood, the most ruthless cattle baron in 3 counties. Jed had a way of smiling that never reached his eyes, and every rancher in the territory knew he played dirtier than a snake in a mud hole. Jed reined up at the gate, his stallion tossing its head. "I hear you've got company." Elijah's jaw tightened. "What's it to you?" Jed's grin widened. "That fella you buried out on the trail? He owed me money. A lot of money. And since he ain't around to pay it, I figure I'll take payment in land." Before Elijah could answer, the sound of boots on dirt came from behind. Rachel and the other widows stepped out of the bunkhouse in a line, each holding a rifle with the ease of women who knew how to use them. Their faces were stone, their eyes locked on the intruders. The air went so still Elijah could hear the whisper of wind through the dry grass. Even the horses seemed to sense the weight of the moment. Rachel stepped forward, the barrel of her rifle never wavering. Her voice was cold enough to cut. "You can leave now, Jed, or you can leave in a box." The men behind Jed shifted uneasily in their saddles. Jed's grin faltered, replaced by a look that was all venom. He spat into the dirt, glaring at Rachel like he was memorizing her face. Without another word, he yanked the reins and turned his horse. The riders wheeled around, kicking up another trail of dust as they vanished over the rise. But Elijah saw the promise in Jed's eyes before he left. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After that day, Elijah stopped thinking of the ranch as his alone. Something had shifted, quiet as the turning of a season. The widows stayed without asking, working beside him as if they'd been born to the place. They mended fence lines shoulder to shoulder with him, rode the pastures at dawn, and kept their rifles propped within easy reach. They guarded the land like it was their own, and in time, Elijah realized it had become just that, theirs. The days took on a steady rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of biscuits baking in the big iron stove. Evenings ended with the women gathered around the fire, their laughter threading through the air like music. They told stories. Some about dusty trails and river crossings, others about nights under endless stars. A few tales stopped short, the words trailing into silence when the memories grew too heavy. Elijah didn't push. He knew better than to ask for more than they were ready to give. Still, piece by piece, he learned fragments of their past, enough to understand that they'd been running from something as much as they were running toward it. They taught him things too. Rachel showed him how to sight a rifle faster and steadier, how to hit a moving target without wasting a bullet. Another widow, a wiry woman named Claire, taught him to read the faintest tracks in the dirt. Before long, Elijah found himself relying on them in ways he hadn't relied on anyone in years. And something else began to stir in him. For too long, the ranch had been nothing but work, endless chores under the hot sun, nights so quiet they pressed on his chest. Now there was warmth in the place. Light in the windows after dark. Laughter that carried into the barn when he worked late. He still didn't know the whole story. He didn't know why 6 armed widows had arrived on his land or why Jed Blackwood wanted them gone. But he knew one thing for certain: they weren't just passing through. And deep down, Elijah felt it, the ranch wasn't just a place to survive anymore. It was a place worth fighting for. That winter, Amos Thatcher buried a stranger's husband. By spring, he'd learned that some families you're born into, and others ride in with loaded rifles and the will to fight for their own.